that in 1092 Nizamul Mulk al-Tusi rahmatullah was actually assassinated by a Hashashiyin assassin who had been sent by the Batinis. If you listen to the first lecture, you'll understand the context there. So I'm not going to go back into explaining that. In 1098, something else happened, or in 1099, a very difficult situation occurred, in which the Ummah at that time was beset with huge problems, and that was the First Crusade and the fall of Jerusalem, or fall of Baytul Muqaddas in 1099. It says that the work that Nizamul Mulk al-Tusi rahmatullah alayhi carried out, and the work that Hazrat Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi carried out, was eventually bore fruit many years later, 1187, when the Ummah woke up in its slumber and managed to then wrest Jerusalem back from the Crusades after the Battle of Hattin, led by Salahuddin Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi. Some great writers, Abdul Rahman al-Azam, who was an Oxford graduate, and he wrote a book published about 10 years ago regarding the life of of Salahuddin Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi. And he says that Salahuddin Ayyubi's fikr and soch and his Islamic jazba that was created inside him was actually the outcome of two things. One was the madrasa system set up by Nizamul Mulk al-Tusi rahmatullah alayhi, and the other was the tasawwuf and the tazkiyah set up by Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi. There's a lot more discussion around that. So I should just mention that because it's something that we weren't able to mention last week. We discussed last week that there's different parts, there's 4 parts to Imam Ghazali's Ihya al-Muddin and his Arba'in, and it's the third part that we're going to be focusing on. And the third part is fi tazkiyatul qalb and akhlaq al-mazmuma, that purification of the heart from the reprehensible traits, from the negative traits. The verse of the Quran, the 2 verses of the Quran I recited earlier, Allah Almighty, both from the 30th Sipara, the 30th Juz, Allah Almighty says, قَدْ أَفْلَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى, that indeed success is for the person who purifies the self. And the other ayat, Allah Almighty says, قَدْ أَفْلَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, that indeed success is for the person who purifies the nafs. We understand from this the importance of this. Many hadith, as the Shaykh al-Hadith, Imam Zakir rahmatullah alayhi, in Fazail al-Amal, Fazail al-Sadaqat, time and again mentions the hadith of the 3 people who will be summoned in front of the court of Allah Almighty on the Day of Judgment. One will be the Qari al-Quran, the second will be the Mujahid, and the third will be the rich man who gave all his wealth in the path of Allah. All 3 of them will be asked similar questions. What do you do for me? One will say, I gave my blood. One will say that I gave my wealth. One say, I taught throughout my entire life. Allah Almighty says, no, you didn't do this for me. You did it so that it will be said that you're a wealthy person and you gave greatly. Or it will be said that you are a brave man and you fought bravely. Or it said you're a well-learned scholar and you taught and you're greatly well known. And Allah Almighty will then say that because your intention was corrupt, you should be thrown into the fire of hell, and they'll be taken, and the angels will be commanded to take him into the fire of Jahannam. As Moualana Abdul Fisab rahmatullah alayhi used to often mention this and say, as a Shaykh rahmatullah alayhi, time and again he's mentioned this hadith because of the importance of one little thing. The amal is so great, teaching of ilm. The amal is so great, fighting in the way of Allah. The amal is so great that a person gives his wealth in the sadaqah, but there's something that was corrupt. There's something very small and something very little that was corrupt, which is the intention. And when the intention is corrupt, then all the amal is completely useless. So you understand from this that the purification of the heart, to do things for Allah Almighty, to remove the negative traits and all of the different traits, is absolutely crucial and important. As Moualana Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he says that for a person to become a perfect and complete person and person of complete faith, then the purification of the self from that which Allah Ta'ala does not like is wajib and compulsory upon this person. And then he talks about this a little bit, but then he says that at this moment in time, let's understand how do you purify yourself if you don't understand what the negative traits are. And he says there are many. وَلَكِنْ تَرْجِعُ شَعْبُهَا إِلَىٰ أَشَّةِ أَصُولٍ. He says that, but they all come back to 10 things, 10 principles, and hence the 10 lectures that we're going to go through. And the first one, as I mentioned last week, is al-asl al-awwal fi ta'am, that the first is gluttony, excessive eating. He says overeating, overconsumption, binge eating, eating too much, all the negative traits go back to this one thing. وَهُوَ مِنَ الْأُمَّهَاتِ الْعَظِيمَةِ is from the greatest source of harm to a person's deen, to a person's faith. Now a person will question, how can overeating actually affect a person's faith? And he answers this. He says, لِأَنَّ الْمَعْدَةَ يَنْبُوعُ الشَّهَوَاتِ. He says that the stomach in itself is the wellspring of all carnal desires. That all the desires come out from the stomach itself. إِذْ مِنْهَا تَشَعَبُ شَهْوَةُ الْفَرْجِ. From it comes the shahwat, the carnal desire associated with a person's private parts. And that when a person comes into a situation that he's desirous of food, he's desirous of women, then from there another type of shahwa comes about, and that's the love of wealth. Why? Because a person, if he wants to eat well, and if he wants to eat expensive, and he wants to eat a lot, and at the same time he wants to marry and be with the best women out there, then he needs wealth. Without wealth, he's not able to acquire those two things. وَتَشَعَبُ مِنْ شَهْوَةِ الْمَالِ شَهْوَةُ الْجَاهِ. Once you get wealth and money starts coming, then you want to have a higher status in society. You want to be someone big. And then from there, and the reason behind that is that without wealth, a person, without status, a person isn't able to acquire wealth. And then once you've got the wealth and you've got the status, then all the other illnesses start kicking in, one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. And he lists them, and he says pride, riya, ostentation, showing off, hasad, jealousy, hiqd, yani malice, adawa, enmity, etc., etc. And when you go back to all of these different spiritual illnesses, it all goes back to one thing, the stomach, he says. And this is why Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam mentions in hadith. And before I mention the hadith, I just remember the story, Hakim al-Ummad, Mujaddid al-Millat, Moualana Shafi Tanvi rahmatullah alayhi. He mentions inside his khutbat that there was a Bedouin, and he had a friend who was another Bedouin, but the other friend was on what we would call miserate. If anybody remembers the heaters, miserate. So he turned up at his house one day and knocked on the door. He came inside, and his friend was eating fig. And as soon as he saw his friend, because he was a bit of a stingy person, he covered it up with his dastakhan. He covered up the dates with his dastakhan. The friend came in and he noticed and he realized this guy's eating fig. He's eating what? Teen. Yeah? A teen. And he's covered it up. And then he turns, Imam Moualana Tanvi rahmatullah alayhi then says that they started talking about this and that, and he started preoccupying him with a bit of loose talk here and there, a bit of like, just to get his mind off things. Hopefully it'll go away so I can enjoy my fig by myself. So and then during the course of the conversation, he ran out of things to say, so read some Quran to me. So he said, okay, وَالزَّيْتُونِ وَطُورِ سِينِينَ وَهَذَا الْبَلَدِ الْأَمِينَ. Yeah, he reads that, but he misses out what teen. So then the Bedouin turns around and says, oh, you missed something out, you missed something out. He said, what did I miss out? He said, you missed out teen, the fig. He said, well, the fig's hiding underneath your dastakhan. The fig is hiding underneath your dastakhan. Hazrat Tanvi rahmatullah alayhi then says that, just for a bit of food, a person, just to fill his stomach. And so many things that people will do just in order to acquire this. And that's at a very low level, you could possibly say. He's got another story about he's got another story about the lemon squeezer, a lemon squeezer. So he says in the khutbah, I like his stories, I think they're quite interesting. But he's got a story about lemon squeezer. So there's a caravan saraya. So everyone knows what a caravan saraya is, the travelers inn back in the olden days in India. And in this particular travelers inn, so all the customers are new, they don't know who's already sitting there. There's one guy who comes every day with a bunch of lemons, and he sits there. He sits there and he waits for someone sharif. He waits for someone noble. And as soon as someone orders something, karai gosh, nihari, whatever, alim or whatever, the waiter comes and places. So this guy gets up and he says, Are bhaiya, I've got some lemon. Let me just put some lemon on your food. Absolutely, it'll just enhance the taste completely. So, he's not from around here, he's from outside. He doesn't realize what this guy is doing. He's doing a bit of a del boy. So he allows him to put the lemon on, and then he says, because he's sharif, he says, oh, why don't you just join me? Why don't you just join me? And if he doesn't say, why don't you just join me, then he'll still stick his roti in and he'll eat properly. And he does this every day, twice a day. This is the way he eats every day. So this guy does. Hazrat Tanvi rahmatullah alayhi says that this person then one day, he does it, but he miscalculates the individual. He doesn't realize that this individual on this other side is a little bit tikka. He's a little bit hot. So as soon as he puts the lemon in and begins eating, this person turns around and slaps him straight in the face. So the guy hits him. So he turns around and starts crying and he starts wailing. And then he says to him, कि मेरे अब्बा, my dad, मुझे इसी तरह मार मार के पिटाई करके खाना खिलाते थे. My dad used to feed me in this exact same way by slapping me and hitting me. So this person who's eating, he holds back. This person's made me his father right now. And then the other person, the Del Boy type of character, he carries on eating. Hazrat Tanvir Rahmatullah alayhi then says, he laughs, he says, look at this lemon squeezer. Look what he's doing for a bit of food. Because the stomach is the root of a lot of illnesses. And a lot of things people will do. A lot of he'll go quite far in order to fill his stomach. So anyway, coming back to the point. So Imam Ghazali Rahmatullah alayhi, he says that gluttony is the greatest source of harm. And then he brings in, and when you look at the Mashaykh's books, the Mashaykh of Tasawwuf, the Sufis books, they say that there's 4 principles within Tasawwuf itself, especially when it comes to mujahada, breaking the nafs. One is qillat kalam, speaking less, or being mindful of what you say. And the second is qillat ta'am, being mindful of not overeating, measuring how much you eat, watching what you eat. Qillat manam, and being measured when it comes to sleeping, not oversleeping. And qillat ikhtilat mal anam, that minimizing how much you actually meet and join up with people and go out with people. These are 4 things. So Imam Ghazali Rahmatullah alayhi, he's actually going to the second issue, which is qillat ta'am, minimizing how much you eat. And he says that if a person, the books of Tasawwuf say, if the person wants to control himself on these 4 things, then he'll be able to control his nafs. He'll be able to control his nafs. But when it comes to minimizing or moderating all of these 4 things, it should be done with the consultation of a sheikh. Imam Ghazali Rahmatullah alayhi then moves on. And he mentions a number of hadiths. He says, مَا مِنْ عَمَلٍ أَحَبَّ إِلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى مِنَ الْجُوعِ وَالْعَطْشِ. He said there is no action that is more beloved to Allah Almighty than hunger and thirst. In another hadith, he says, لا يدخل ملكوت السماوات من ملأ بطنه, that the person who fills his stomach shall not enter the realm of the hereafter. And then he says in another hadith, Sayyidul A'mal al-Ju', that the greatest of the master of actions is hunger. He says, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Al-fikru nisful ibadah, that contemplation, meditation is half of worship. And وَقِلَّةُ الطَّعَامِ هِيَ الْعِبَادَةِ. And also he said, وَقِلَّةُ الطَّعَامِ, and that eating less is ibadah, worship in itself. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam also said, أَفْضَلُكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى أَتْوَلُكُمْ جَوْعًا وَتَفَكُّرًا, that the greatest of you in the eyes of Allah Almighty will be those who have spent the most time hungry and in meditation. And the most disliked in the eyes of Allah Almighty from amongst you is the person who eats too much, drinks too much, and sleeps too much. Nabi Karim sallallahu alaihi wasallam in another hadith says, "Ma malabnu Adama wi'an sharran min batni," that the son of Adam shall not fill any vessel. All the hadiths are quite self-explanatory. It does not fill a vessel that's worse than his stomach. And what is enough for the son of Adam? A few luqmas, a few morsels to keep his back straight. To keep his back straight. Even though, and if that's difficult, then just a third for his food, a third for his drink, and a third for himself. Sorry, not for himself, for his nafas. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam also said in a hadith, in the shaitan لَيَجْرِي مِبْنِ Adam, that the devil runs inside the son of Adam, in the place, in the vessel, in the veins and the arteries of his body, where his blood flows. فَضَيِّقُوا مَجَارِيَهُ بِالْجُوعِ وَالْعَطْشِ. So make it the places where the roots and the journey that it takes through the arteries and the vessels difficult by hunger and thirst. But Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says in another hadith to Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, adimi qar'a babil jannah, that continuously knock on the door of Jannah. Yuftah laki, the door of Jannah shall be open for you. Qala, she says, nudimu, how shall I continuously knock on the door of Jannah? Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, bil ju'i wal dhama'i, by hunger and by thirst. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says in another hadith, Kulu washrabu, eat and drink, fi ansafil butun, half of your stomachs, fa innahu juz'un minan nubuwah, for indeed it's a part of nubuwah. So that's the preliminary bit about hunger, gluttony, and what Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi mentions. He explains how it's the root of a number of illnesses, how all these different other illnesses come about on account of eating. He then supports it with a number of hadith. And after he's done that, then he goes on to the benefits of hunger. And I'm going to quickly run through that because I'm aware that time is short. And he says that maybe لَعَلَّكَ تَشْتَهِي أَن تَعْلَمَ السِّرَّ فِي تَعْظِيمِ الْجُوعِ. Maybe it's the question is that you might want to know the secret behind why hunger is so great and why it's so appropriate for the path to the hereafter. So he says that there are many benefits. And the benefits he lists here are 7. As the Shaykh Hadith Muhammad Zakir Rahmatullah in Fazail al-Sadaqat part 2, there's one hadith, I think it's number 15 in the 6th chapter. He brings everything up from Ihya Ulumuddin, and Imam Ghazali is writing in there. And he lists the 10 benefits that Imam Ghazali mentions in Ihya Ulumuddin. So if you want to read about it more, I would also recommend reading Fazail al-Sadaqat part 2. Because in there, as the Shaykh Rahmatullah Alayhi has brought all of Ihya Ulumuddin in there in different places, and he's contextualized all of it. But anyway, he mentions, Imam Ghazali Rahmatullah Alayhi mentions the 7 reasons why staying hungry or eating less is actually beneficial. Number 1, it creates clarity of the heart and keen insight. It creates clarity of the heart and clear insight. Next, softness of the heart so much that one feels the pleasure of conversing with Allah and being affected by dhikr and worship. It also humbles the ego. Number 3, humbling of the ego. It breaks the nafs. It makes it humble. It removes arrogance and a dominating attitude within a person. So it humbles a person. Number 4, tribulation is from the gates of paradise, in that tribulation is torment. So the difficulty a person experiences when he's hungry, it's one of the gates of paradise. And it's one of the difficulties. And by experiencing this difficulty, then he thinks that, I want to avoid Jahannam, I want to enter Jannat. And he would strive towards it. Number 5, the greatest benefit is breaking the other desires, which are the wellspring of disobedience. So all the other nafs, by staying hungry, he is able to break his nafs, which is the root of disobedience. And he's able to overpower the nafs ammara. Number 6, he's able to lighten the body for tahajjud and ibadat. When a person eats too much, he just wants to sleep. When your stomach grows too big, you find it difficult getting out of bed. You find it difficult to waking up. You're not able to do the worship in the way that you want to do. But by eating less, a person is able to sleep less. He's a bit lighter, he can do more worship. Number 7, and this is the last one, he says, lightness of burden. Then the financial burden on a person decreases by eating less. Because when he suffices on a little, then he has more money to do other good deeds. So these are the 7 benefits that Imam Ghazali Rahmatullah Alayhi then mentions about. And he has a lot more tashri inside, a lot more explanation. He mentions a lot more things in there. But it goes over a couple of pages. I'm not going to go into all of that. But then after that, he moves on to another chapter. And he says how to reduce food. لَعَلَّكَ تَقُولُ, perhaps you might say, قد صار الشبع والإكثار في الأكل لي عادة فكيف أتركها. Maybe perhaps you might say that being full and eating to my full and to eating a lot has become my habit. How do I leave it? How do I leave it? And he explains that this can be done very easily. He says it can be done very easily, but it needs to be done gradually. And that is to decrease a morsel a day until you've achieved eating 1 less roti over a month. So every day you just decrease it a little bit, just a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. So by the end of the month, your intake decreases significantly. Who needs Weight Watchers? Yeah. He then says, if you want to eat less, then you need to focus on 3 things. And he explains this. He says time, amount, and type. And this is where he goes into a bit of a discussion. I'm going to quickly run through that, and I'm going to then contextualize it with what our Akabir say. So he says that when it comes to the time, when it comes to the amount, there's a upper level, a middle level, and a low level. He says the upper level is just to eat enough to live, and that's the way of the Siddiqs. And the middle level is to eat half a mud a day. And that was the way of Sayyidina Umar and a group of companions. And half a mud would be around 270 grams. So if you, maybe 1 bowl of cornflakes is about 50 grams, 1 roti is about 50 grams, just work it out. It's not much. Especially when you put the salan and the curry and everything inside it. It's quite less. And the low level is 1 mud a day. So that's the amount. The time is, there's a lofty, middle, or low level. And I'm just going to mention it because it still needs to be contextualized. According to Imam Ghazali and the earlier Sufis, he says you should go without food for 3 days. That's the top level. The middle level is 2 days, and the lower level is to eat once a day. And then when it comes to type, then there's a lofty level and a lower level. So when it comes to lofty level, just wheat bread without a condiment, without any curry. And the lower level is to eat just roti or barley bread with a condiment. However, for the purpose of this lecture, and I can see that people might be frowning and thinking, that's quite extreme. How do you actually achieve that? What Imam Ghazali is suggesting is actually the extreme. And that's something that was recommended by the earlier Sufis. You can go back to the books and they all mention this time and again. And that's why our Mashaykh can always say, but when it comes to authentic and old-fashioned and the old Tasawwuf books, you should read by a Sheikh. You should take and do consultation with a Sheikh so that they can contextualize it and explain what's inside it for this particular age. And one of the books that in our tariqah we recommend is Imdadus Suluk or Irshadul Muluk by Moualana Gangohi Rahmatullah Alayh. The earlier Sufis would take the difficult path, but looking at the temperaments of the people that came later, Moualana Gangohi Rahmatullah Alayh in Imdadus Suluk, Irshadul Muluk, he mentions that one should be moderate and this is the best way. One should be moderate in how much they eat and this is the best way. Moderate is to eat such an amount that one does not burp, so that the stomach being full doesn't stop and prevent one from worship. Also, one should not be so hungry that one is unable to worship, and that is also not positive. So it needs to be a middle path in between. Not too hungry that you can't function, and not too much that you still can't function, but in the middle path. It should be enough to keep one going, and it can easily be digested. Mawlana Masihullah Khan Sahib Rahmatullah Alayh, the Khalifa of Hazrat Thanvi Rahmatullah Alayh. In fact, Hazrat Thanvi Rahmatullah Alayh, in many of his books, he mentions this. He mentions this masla, but Hazrat Thanvi Rahmatullah Alayh, he explains it in a very academic and eloquent way, which to summarize in a short little few minutes it becomes quite difficult. But Mawlana Masihullah Khan Sahib Rahmatullah Alayh, in his Urdu book, Shariat or Tariqat, which was then translated into English and published by White Thread Press as Path to Perfection, which is a great book, he also explains this in very eloquent terms, and I've produced it here, and I'll just read this out quickly. He says, reduction in food is not an end in itself, but a means of acquiring a specific aim. This aim is to weaken the animal urge in a man, and thereby prevent the lower self, yani the carnal self, from sinning. Therefore, if the self can be controlled and restrained from sin without reducing food, then reduction in food is not necessary. Furthermore, cheerfulness and joy in worship. A person should eat and feel a little bit satisfied. Otherwise, he's going to be, he's going to be irritated. It'd be like Ramzan, 12 months a year in that case. Everyone's on the edge. When's he going to blow his fuse? But what he says is that a person should be cheerful and joyous in worship, or experience if the body is in the state of health and strength. Furthermore, cheerfulness and joy in worship are experienced if the body is in a state of health and strength. Experience shows that nowadays health, in most cases, suffers as a result of reduction in food. So people go on to crazy diets, low-carb diet. And we're a community, we've brought up on roti from a young age. Chawal, lunchtime, supper time, roti. Yeah, that's our community. And you tell people to cut out all the carbs, you go on to vegetables, give it 2-3 weeks and your mind goes. You just can't function. You might even end up in hospital at that rate because the sugar rush isn't there. How do you do it? You need to decrease it bit by bit. At the same time, one must abstain from excessive eating and adhere to moderation. The capacity of people differs. Hence, moderation will differ for different persons. The guideline in this matter is to eat when hungry and to stop eating when you feel that you can still eat a few more morsels. In other words, one is allowed to eat to one's fill, but not to satisfy one's craving. And that's the summary of today's lesson, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Apologies, gone over a bit. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallah wa bihamdihi, la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka.